everybody. It is so good to have you back for week 2 of our Colossians Q&A series. Thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks. It's my pleasure to be here.
I'm glad.
Good.
But hey, before we get into the questions, can you just refresh our minds about this message this last week where you talked a lot about the enemy being the enemy?
Yeah. Totally. I think one of the things that happens in our world today is, we're told, or we begin to think there's all these things in and around us that are our enemy. Like the media is the enemy, the virus is the enemy, this political party is the enemy. And really, I think that is one of Satan's greatest schemes, or one of his greatest deceptions, is to cause us to begin to believe that anything or someone or something is the enemy instead of him being the enemy. And so to recognize that, like, we are fighting a battle in this world today, but we're fighting a battle against Satan, that he is the enemy. And we have to focus our energy and efforts not on all these other things that the world wants us to believe, but on the true enemy that's working in our midst.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, with that being said, let's jump into the questions. So
Okay.
One of the questions we had was, how do we see the enemy in the world? Because it's so easy, like you were saying, to get caught up into, putting the enemy as politics or the virus or masks or, whatever it is, you name it. But how do we start to recognize what he is implanted in, really?
Yeah, I think maybe that's the wrong perspective to start from. Mm-hmm. Like, instead of like, okay, well, is this the enemy? Well, is Satan in this? Is Satan in this? Is Satan in this? Like, that's like literally a never ending sort of questioning and pursuit, and you can analyze it and overanalyze it. I think the better things is to be looking around saying, well, what is God in? Mm-hmm. What is God for? And then we pursue those things. We put our energy and effort on those things, instead of trying to figure out what we should avoid and what we shouldn't be a part of. And I think because there's very clear ways that God is working in the world today. He's working in communities and churches and people's lives. And how do we partner with God in the good rather than trying to run around and identify what is bad? And I think one of the things I've heard it said before, I think is super important, is be known for what you're for, not what you're against. And I think when you're trying to run around and find the enemy, you're trying to define what you're against instead of throwing yourself towards what you're for.
That's good. That's good. Well, that actually goes right into what our next question is, and that's how do we be people who are, I guess kind of fighting the enemy, but in such a way that we're, honoring God and not necessarily being social justice warriors or, you name it.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I would say is, we did a series on the kingdom of God, I guess, a while ago. Who knows what time is anymore, right? Like it's on our website. You can go check it out on our website. But I think there's a reality that God's kingdom is present here and now, but it's also eternal forever. And one of the things that we have a task and a calling to do is his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that's kind of like what I talk about. Instead of trying to define and stop all these, let's bring heaven to earth each and every day. And when we look, we want to speak love into the world. We want to speak life into the world. We want to speak Jesus into the world. We want to care about others and be people of empathy. Like, these are the things that really begin to display values of God's kingdom in our world today. Like, apart from this season, apart from the craziness of everything that's going on. Oh, by the way, there's an election coming up. Mm-hmm. This should be our pursuit in every season, every day of life. As Christ followers, for those of us who consider ourselves Christ followers, what are we doing to bring his kingdom into our world each and every day in a bigger and more present way? Because that's when transformation happens. That's when communities and countries and lives are transformed. They're transformed, the work of the kingdom of God and the sacrifice of Jesus. So that's what I'd say. I don't know if it's super helpful. I know it's big picture, but I think if you want to focus on only the things that you can do in that moment, it's how do I bring these kingdom values into my everyday life with the people that God has put around me?
That's good. That's good. Just to elaborate on that a little bit more, let's talk about what are some ways we could do that practically? I know that, being a Christian isn't a checklist, but we often make it that. But what are some practical ways we can start so that just becomes regular? Whether it's, a lot of us are at home a lot of the time. Some of us still don't feel safe to go out yet. So when we're at home, maybe we're using social media. Like, what are the things there? How can we be kingdom minded, kingdom driven in that? Or maybe we're back into the real world and or the populated world, I guess, and we're just going about our daily lives. Maybe it's in the grocery store or wherever. Just as we interact with individuals or even alone, like, how do we start putting that into practice?
Yeah. And I think like, so I talked to a few weeks back, and not to constantly reference like, oh, Maddie, we talked about this, but I mentioned like all of us have promptings in our life. And I think the Spirit of God prompts us to do the things of God, to illuminate these kingdom values, to bring them into our world through our actions, through the way we care and we love. And so quite literally, practically how you do it is you attune yourself to the promptings and then you begin to act on them. And the reality is often when it comes to promptings, we have detuned ourselves. Like we're like, okay, I don't really want to do that because I got to run to Starbucks right now. Or like, hey, like I don't really want to do this because I got X, Y, and Z on my list. And like those are some of the things that we need to push back because God is prompting us each and every day. And we talked about what's the filter for that? Like, okay, does it honor God and show love to that person? And if it honors God and shows love to that person, then do it. And so if we're talking like how do you minimize the effects of the enemy? How do you maximize the work of the kingdom? Just do the things of God. Does it honor him? And does it display love to that individual? And if so, then do it. And if it doesn't, well, then don't post it on social media, or don't say that to your coworker, or like don't do this to your neighbor, or don't act that way to your kids. Like just beware of the promptings, be discerning in where they're coming from. And if they're of God and for God, then do it. And that's how it begins to change. And that's how we see transformation in our communities.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up now. If you have questions that you want Mike or whoever is speaking to answer, make sure to send them in to questions at lakesawyerchurch.org, questions at lakesawyerchurch.org. And it's the questions that are relevant to the series or the message that was just spoken on, and we will answer those on Tuesday of next week or the week following it. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And it's always fun. It's always cool to hang out and be able to answer some of these questions.
Absolutely. Go ahead and join us at 9 or 10:45 online on Sunday, or reserve your spot at lakesawyerchurch.org for our 9 a.m. service. We hope to see you then.